7 hills, a river, and nothing else. In 753 BC, this was all Rome was, a collection of muddy slopes above the Tiber, wild and untamed, no different from 1,000 other forgotten places across the ancient world. But on one of those hills, something was beginning. A few reed huts, a handful of fires, the first footsteps of what would become the greatest city the world had ever seen. Those first settlers were simple Latin tribespeople, barefoot and rough, living in thatched huts on the Palatine Hill. They fished the Tiber, herded goats on the slopes, and knew nothing of empire. But they were not alone for long. From the north came the Etruscans, a sophisticated civilization who looked at this cluster of hilltop villages and saw something worth shaping. Under their influence, Rome began to change. Dirt paths became stone roads. Thatch became terracotta. A village became a city. For over a century, the Etruscans ruled Rome through a line of kings, building its streets, its temples, its first sewers. They gave Rome its alphabet, its religion, its ambition. But the Romans were proud people. And pride, given enough time, always turns to rebellion. In 509 BC, the last Etruscan king was driven from the city in a single night. Rome gathered on its hills at dawn and made a decision that would echo through all of human history. There would be no more kings. Rome would govern itself. The Roman Republic was born in fire and conviction. 2 elected consuls would share power. A Senate of 300 would guide the city. No single man would ever rule alone. It was a radical idea in a world of kings and pharaohs. And it worked. With that new energy, the Romans turned to building. The valley between the hills was drained and paved. Temples rose. Markets opened. The Forum Romanum began to take shape. The beating heart of a civilization finding its stride. For generations, Rome grew steadily, confidently, brick by brick and road by road. Its legions pushed outward across the Italian peninsula, bringing more land, more people, more wealth back to the 7 hills. The city swelled with ambition. And then, in 390 BC, everything stopped. Out of the north came the Gauls, a wave of iron and fire that swept through Rome's defenses like they were nothing. The city burned. The Forum crumbled. For the first time in its history, Rome knew what it felt like to fall. The Gauls took everything they could carry and left. What remained was ash and silence. But Rome did not stay silent for long. From the ruins, the Romans rebuilt. And this time they built in stone. New walls rose around the hills, thicker and higher than anything before. The legions reformed, retrained, and marched back out into Italy with something new in their eyes. Not just ambition, hunger. Rome had been humiliated once. It would never happen again. Rome had rebuilt itself from ash, and it would never stop expanding. The legions marched out in every direction, disciplined, unstoppable, relentless. City by city, tribe by tribe, the entire Italian peninsula fell under Roman control. From above, the city gleamed with new walls and new ambition. Rome was master of Italy, but one rival remained across the sea. And to reach it, Rome would have to march its soldiers through every conquered town between here and the Mediterranean coast. Roman soldiers moved through every conquered town the same way, silent, disciplined, their red cloaks cutting through the dust. Citizens pressed into doorways and watched them pass. Rome controlled Italy, but Carthage, the great trading empire of North Africa, controlled the Mediterranean, and Rome had decided it wanted that too. Then came the moment that nearly ended everything. A Carthaginian general named Hannibal crossed the Alps with an army and war elephants and marched straight into Italy. Hannibal's army came over the Alps in winter, war elephants and 100,000 soldiers descending onto the Italian plains like nothing Rome had ever faced. For 15 years, he lived on Roman soil, winning battle after battle, bleeding the Republic dry. Rome lost more men to Hannibal than in any war before or since. And yet Rome did not break. It bent, it bled, it endured, and then it struck back. In 146 BC, the Roman legions stood in the burning ruins of Carthage. Roman soldiers stood among the smoldering rubble as the Mediterranean glittered through a broken archway behind them. The great rival was gone. Carthage was burned to the ground and salted so nothing would grow there again. The wealth of the Western Sea now belonged to Rome. Its population exploded. Its streets grew dense and loud and magnificent. Over 1 million people now lived within its walls, and the republic that governed them was beginning to crack under the weight of its own success. Rome's wealth bred ambition, and ambition bred dangerous men. Generals commanded armies loyal to them personally, not to the republic. Julius Caesar was the most brilliant of them all, a general, a politician, a manipulator of genius. He crossed the Rubicon, marched on Rome, and made himself its absolute master. On the steps of the Senate on the Ides of March 44 BC, his colleagues ended it with 23 knife wounds. But it was already too late to save the Republic. The age of emperors had begun. Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, outmaneuvered every rival, defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and in 27 BC became Augustus, the first true emperor of Rome. He famously said he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. New temples, new roads, new forums spread across the 7 hills. The legions stood assembled. The Tiber was lined with bridges. Rome had entered its golden age, and its streets were about to fill with something the world had never seen before. At its peak, Rome was a city unlike anything the ancient world had produced. Over 1 million people crowded its streets, senators and slaves, merchants and philosophers, gladiators and priests. The Colosseum rose above the rooftops, its arches visible from every corner of the city. Markets buzzed beneath its walls from dawn until dark. Vendors selling food and wine, crowds pushing toward the great arched entrances. This was Rome at the height of its power, and from the air it was even more extraordinary. The Colosseum packed with 50,000 roaring spectators, aqueducts feeding the city from the hills on every side, the Tiber lined with bridges and boats, 1 million people moving through the streets below like a single breathing organism. Under Trajan, the empire stretched from Scotland to Mesopotamia, the largest the Western world had ever known. Rome was the center of the world, and it knew it. And from above, the full scale of what it had built was almost impossible to comprehend. The Colosseum at the center, the aqueducts reaching to the horizon, the Tiber glittering in the golden light. This was Rome at its absolute peak, a city of 1 million people, the capital of the known world, a civilization that had built something no one had ever built before. And among everything it constructed, one building stood apart from all the rest, one oculus open to the sky, one beam of light moving slowly across the marble floor as the hours passed. The Pantheon, completed by Hadrian in 125 AD, a dome so perfectly engineered it would stand without reinforcement for 2,000 years. To stand inside it was to understand what Rome believed about itself, that it had built something eternal. And outside its doors, The triumphs were coming, golden chariots and the roar of hundreds of thousands filling every street of the city. The empire celebrated its conquests with triumphs, golden chariots moving through crowds of hundreds of thousands. Soldiers and captives and treasures from the ends of the earth parading down the sacred way with the Colosseum watching over it all. These were the moments Rome told itself its own story. The greatest city on earth at the center of the world. But the cracks were already forming beneath the marble, and soon the civil wars would come to the streets of Rome itself. Emperors rose and fell with terrifying speed. Over 20 men claimed the throne in 50 years, most dying violently. Civil war came to the streets of Rome itself. Statues of emperors were toppled before their successors had even settled on the throne. The marble city that Augustus had built was beginning to crack. And then, out of the chaos, came a general named Constantine, who marched on Rome under a new symbol, the Christian cross. At the Battle of Milvian Bridge, two vast armies would face each other across the Tiber. Light broke through the storm clouds above the river as two armies converged. Constantine won, and with that single victory, everything changed. The first Christian emperor now ruled the greatest city on earth. Christianity spread through Rome like fire through dry grass. Old pagan temples fell silent as new basilicas rose beside them. Workers carried stone through streets that had once been lined with statues of Jupiter and Mars. And Rome was transforming again, not through conquest, but through belief. The mosaics of Christ appeared above doorways where Roman gods had stood for centuries. New basilicas rose across the city, but the Western Empire was dying. Barbarian generals now commanded Roman armies. Barbarian kings sat on Roman thrones in all but name. In 410 AD, the Visigoth king Alaric breached the walls of Rome and sacked the city for 3 days. Fires burned across every district. It was the first time a foreign army had entered Rome in 800 years, and the flames were visible from the throne room itself. The Visigoth king Alaric had breached the walls, and the city was burning. Fires spread across every district. The streets that had once roared with triumph processions were now filled with screaming and smoke. It was the first time a foreign army had entered Rome in 800 years. The shock that rippled through the ancient world was total. If Rome could fall, anything could fall. And in the throne room, the end was coming quietly. A barbarian general walked into the throne room of the last Western Roman emperor and removed the imperial crown from his head. The Senate benches were empty. No army marched to restore the empire. The Western Roman Empire ended not with a battle, but with a quiet act in a torchlit room. Rome was left to itself, a city of ghosts. And from above, the silence that followed was total. The centuries that followed were the long silence. Rome's population collapsed from over 1 million to barely 30,000. The Forum filled with weeds. The aqueducts broke and were not repaired. The marble that had taken centuries to carve was stripped and burned for lime. And yet the idea of Rome refused to die. In 800 AD, a Frankish king knelt in the candlelight of an ancient basilica as a pope placed a crown on his head. The name alone still carried enough power to reshape the world. Charlemagne knelt as the pope placed the crown on his head and declared him Emperor of the Romans. It was a political fiction. Charlemagne ruled France and Germany, not Rome. But the symbolism was everything. Rome had lost its army and its senate and its population, but it had never lost its meaning. And through the medieval centuries that followed, the city slowly began to breathe again. Through the medieval centuries, Rome rebuilt itself slowly around its own ruins. Noble families turned ancient monuments into fortresses. Pilgrims walked the old Roman roads toward St. Peter's Basilica, whose dome rose above the mist and the Tiber like a promise. The population crept back upward. The city that had housed 1 million people was learning to live again, smaller, quieter, but still carrying the weight of everything it had been. And then Rome reached for something extraordinary. In 1506, the Pope ordered the old Basilica of St. Peter torn down and replaced with something the world had never seen. Michelangelo, already in his 70s, took over the design. Standing on a wooden platform above the dust and noise of a construction site, he directed the raising of a dome that would become the defining image of the city's rebirth. Rome was building again. It had not lost the habit. And when the dust settled, a new generation would come to stand before what it had built, torches in hand, notebooks open. By the 18th century, Rome had become something new, a destination. Young aristocrats from across Europe came on the grand tour, standing before the Colosseum by torchlight with notebooks and sketches, trying to understand what this place had once been. The ancient ruin that had once roared with 50,000 voices now stood silent under a full moon, its arches open to the sky. Rome was no longer an empire. It had become a memory so powerful that people traveled thousands of miles just to stand inside it, and soon a new nation would march through its streets. Rome's modern story began on a September morning in 1870. Italian soldiers marched through the city streets as citizens leaned from their balconies waving the green, white, and red of a new nation. The papal flag came down. The Italian tricolor went up. For the first time since the fall of the Western Empire, Rome was the capital of something again. Not an empire this time, but a nation that bore its name. The eternal city had found a new beginning, and from above it was coming back to life. The 20th century brought Rome fully back to life. Vespas and Fiat 500s wove through streets that Roman legions had once marched down. The Colosseum stood surrounded by traffic and golden afternoon light, still the largest structure on the Roman skyline after 2,000 years. The city that had once fed 1 million people from the grain stores of North Africa now fed them from the kitchens of 1,000 trattorias. Rome had survived everything history could throw at it, and today you can sit in its streets and feel every one of those centuries. Today you can sit at a cafe table in the shadow of a Roman column that has stood for 2,000 years, drinking coffee while tourists photograph the ruins behind you. The ancient and the modern share the same cobblestones, the same light, the same air. Rome does not preserve its past behind glass. It lives inside it, around it, completely unbothered by the weight of 27 centuries pressing up through the stone beneath your feet. No city has fallen this many times. No city has risen this many times. No city has meant this much to this many people for this long. Rome, the eternal city,